Number 9 is the Vulgate, which we've certainly discussed in this class in the past. First we'll talk about what it is, and then we'll talk about why it's included. From 1382 to 405 AD, so the guy spent over 20 years doing this. St. Jerome translated the Bible into what was the common language at the time, Latin. What would the uncommon language of the time have been? The official language of the time was Greek to a large extent. Latin was considered the common language, of the vulgar language, hence where Vulgate comes from. He began his task in 382 when Pope Damasus chartered him to translate the 4 Gospels from Old Latin into Modern Latin. So even back then there were different forms of Latin. So Jerome is usually credited with being the first person to create a Latin translation of the Old Testament, and this is key, directly from the Hebrew rather than from the Greek Septuagint. Why is that important? Well, if you are doing a translation of the translation, how close are you to the original source material? You're not. He actually went back to the original Hebrew, and he did his translation from Hebrew into Latin. And here's this wonderful wood carving of, there's Jerome working on his translation. And you see the lion here. And there's a medieval story that Jerome came upon a lion in the forest one time, and the lion was sitting there because he had a thorn in his paw. And Jerome graciously walked up and pulled the thorn out and put a little bandage around the lion's paw.
Oh, Hello Kitty bandage.
Yeah, a little kitty.
Hello Kitty.
And the lion was so grateful to Jerome that he followed him around everywhere he went from that point. And this wonderful wood carving, here's the lion, and the lion's lying down next to a lamb. You can see all kinds of symbolism in this particular drawing. There's St. Jerome.
There's a dead head up there.
So why is this included? Well, first off, Jerome's translation, Jerome's Vulgate, would be the standard translation of the Roman Catholic Church for the next 1,500 years. We talk about the King James Version. King James Version has been around 500 years. Actually, well, I guess it's, about 500 years. It just had its 500th birthday. Was it last year?
No, it'd have to be 400. King James takes the throne in 1603.
So we're
he's
now
from-
in
He's James VI of Scotland, James I of England.
400.
Yeah,
A
400.
little over 400. Vulgate had a 1,500-year ride. When I was small, I remember kids still having English translations of the Vulgate. It didn't go away until Vatican II in the 1960s. That's when they finally said, oh, we really do need a more modern translation, and that's when the Jerusalem Bible became the standard English translation of the Roman Catholic Church. So this by itself is a reason for including it in the top 10. It's the standard translation of the Roman Church for 1,500 years. But there's another reason. And that's that third bullet there that I did in terms of irony. But if you look at Luther and Wycliffe or Wycliffe and Huss and even Calvin's followers with the Geneva Bible, what were they doing in the Reformation? They were translating the Bible into the common language. They were translating it into German, translating it into English, translating it into other languages of the time. And they were being rounded up and put down for it. Well, what did Jerome do? He did the first accessible translation of the Bible into the common language. So, in a sense, Jerome is the father of at least that part of the Reformation.
Well, didn't the Pope tell Jerome to do that?
Yes, he
Well,
did.
the Pope didn't tell the other guys to
The
do it.
Pope didn't tell the other ones.
There you go.
Matter of fact, the Pope told Wycliffe and Luther to stop doing it, and they didn't. But
Write 'em up.
that was the other reason for including it. It was the translation of the Bible into the common tongue so that more people would be able to read it. So,
And also,
And
translation is an interpretation, which means you take the text, you understand it your own way with your own perception, and you translate it into another language. So there are ways of proceeding, either they're acknowledged by the authorities or they're not.
that's a really good point, and I completely agree with the very first thing she said. Did you hear what she said? She said a translation is an interpretation, and that's absolutely correct. It would be almost impossible to write a translation of the Bible that was not an interpretation. Now, some have tried, what do they call it, literal translations of the Bible, where basically they just translate each word, and then kind of it's unreadable because it doesn't make any sense. But in general, every translation of the Bible is an interpretation. Whether it's a Catholic interpretation, it's an evangelical Protestant interpretation. Using the NIV as an example, if you look in just as an example, if you look in the 2nd chapter of Psalms, let's see, talks about the kings of the earth take their stand, the rulers gather together against the Lord and against his anointed one. Well, evangelical Protestants believe the anointed one is referring to the coming Messiah, referring to Christ. So they helpfully capitalize anointed one for you, even though there were no capital letters in ancient Hebrew. That is an interpretation. That's a choice that the translator made to capitalize anointed one. Further down, it talks about, he said to me, you are my sons, and they have become your father. And then further down, kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you be destroyed in your way. Well, they helpfully capitalize son, even though, again, there were no capital letters in ancient Hebrew. That is an interpretation that son is referring to Christ, or son is referring to the divine Messiah. So, absolutely, positively true. Every translation is an interpretation. Jerome's translation would have been standard Catholicism for the time it was written. Luther's translation, Calvin's translation, if we look at the Geneva Bible, I know he didn't actually do the translation, but he did write the liner notes. If we look at all those, they are interpretations, and they are evangelical Christian, evangelical Protestant interpretations. One of the reasons King James wanted to get rid of Tyndale's Bible was because there was a language that Tyndale used which the king didn't approve of, that seemed to question the divine right of kings. Tyndale had done an interpretation in his translation. Tim?
Who said the Pope told Wycliffe not to do that? Why?
Because at the time, which would have been in the 1300s, people like Wycliffe and people like Huss were starting to question basic Catholic doctrines. They're questioning when you do the Eucharist, they're questioning things like the wine actually physically turns into the blood of Christ. They're questioning that we're saved by both works and faith. Because the problem with the works and faith thing is that the works becomes, well, if you attend all 77 feast days and come to Mass 5 times a week and come to confession 3 times a month, then you will be saved. Well, they said, no, that's not how you're saved. You're saved through faith in God. So Wycliffe and Huss are already questioning Catholic doctrines, so when they start doing their translations into the common tongue, the Pope's going to say, no, we don't need your interpretation of the Bible being put in the hands of the English people or the German people, whoever they were. As a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, Wycliffe actually went to the local bishop and said, hey, I got this great idea. Wycliffe was a priest. I got this great idea. I'm going to do this translation of the Bible into English. What do you think? And the priest said, stand down, priest. I mean, right there, the bishop told him that we shouldn't do it. And that's why.